Every year when we get to rohatsu, I'm telling the same story again about the Buddha's awakening. And I have to remind myself every time that it's not the story of the Buddha's awakening. It's the story of someone named Siddhartha, who was not the Buddha. He was an ordinary person. He didn't have an ordinary life necessarily. It was kind of strange. But this story about someone waking up is not a Buddha story. It's an everybody story. And it starts, we can always go back and find another place where it starts, but it starts in a moment when Siddhartha trusts a kind of intuition about spiritual practice. And so part of what I want to do is I want to make a distinction between spirituality and spiritual practice. Spirituality is very internal. Spirituality, if we're not careful, can be a story we tell ourselves to make sense of things or to make things feel better. And it can stop there. It can be the story that we have about what beauty is or what has meaning and what doesn't. It's a kind of manual for processing things. Spiritual practice really rests in effort. I heard a theologian once call it rigor, and that word stuck with me. He asked the audience, is what you are doing something that has rigor? So Siddhartha, and we all know the story, but he goes outside of the palace walls, and there he encounters sickness, old age, and death for the first time. And it's completely shocking to him. It's completely overwhelming. And just, a short ride away, he has a palace full of comforts, a place he can go back to where he doesn't really have to think about this anymore. It might haunt him. It might bother him. But already, everything about his life was designed to keep his eyes off of this. So he could go back, maybe slightly unsettled, and he could allow that world he came from to wash back over him. It's what everyone wanted him to do. But he had a moment of intuition. Faced with something overwhelming, faced with a question that he recognized as a spiritual question, he thought, I think, in the face of this, I need to choose a hard thing. So he did. And he chose to renounce the wealth and renounce the comfort and disappear into the forest and live in a deeply uncomfortable way. He understood, consciously or unconsciously, that if this mattered, then going back to what he was doing before would have no impact on it. He had to do something else. And the story goes that he chose things that were exceptionally hard. It kind of became his whole thing. So he pushed himself to the very, very limits, physically, psychologically, until at some point it wasn't hard anymore. And the hard thing would be to let it go. And to move beyond this heroic story he was telling himself about spiritual sacrifice and spiritual effort. And finally, conditions came together so that he could notice that, and he could trust that same intuition again, and he did let it go. Stepping off of a path that, from the perspective of those around him, had gotten him so close. I think about this a lot, and part of what I think about is how there are the hard things that come to us, and there are the hard things that we choose. If we just live long enough, if we just pay attention, there are hard things that come our way. And very often, they're in these categories, these very same categories of sickness, old age, and death. We get the rug pulled out from under us. Whether it's our sickness or someone else's, our aging or someone else's, our impending death or the loss of someone else. Those moments, those experiences shape us in all sorts of ways. But they also represent a kind of sticky place where if they feel like too much, if the sickness, aging, and death feel like too much, we can stop choosing the hard thing. Because it feels like this is hard enough. And in a way it is. But I want to pose the possibility that even then there's a choice to be made. It might not be a big thing. It might not be that faced with the sickness of a loved one, that you take up some grand spiritual journey. That's not the point. It might be in the face of things that are already so hard that the only thing you can choose is the thing that's in front of you. To choose to fully be here in the face of it. And not try to go somewhere else. Not try to make it go away. Not try to make it something else. Not try to turn it down. but to just choose reality as it is. We're all sitting here in a room, still. It's comfortable. The temperature's great. Everybody's so nice. It's not one of those retreats that feels punishing, right? In a moment like this where everything seems kind of okay, if we look very carefully, if we look honestly and ask ourselves, what is the hardest thing right now? What would be the hard thing? I think we arrive at the same answer that we arrive at in most situations, which is the hard thing is to just be here, to really completely be here. We're doing Zazen all day, and what are we doing all day? We're coming back. Because our brains don't want to do this. They don't want to be right here in this room, breathing this air, listening to the sound of that machine or the cars going by on the street. They don't want to be fully invested in what's happening right now. But they'll take the wind that this posture's kind of nice and the air smells like incense. This is great. And so we drift to the comfortable places. Maybe comfortable because they're wonderful fantasies and we like being there. Maybe comfortable because they're painful places that we've gone back to so many times that they're like muscle memory. And it's easier to fall into that rut than to stay here. I know, and I know I say this all the time, we can't help but come to this practice without wanting something. And I understand that what we want most of the time, most of us, is somehow, through our efforts or through some other means, to establish a new normal, a new, better normal, where I am clearer, I am kinder, I am wiser. And maybe I get there through effort, or maybe I get there because I just hear the right thing at the right time. But I want to level up. If not to graduate, I want to go up a notch from this person that is me right now that is so distracted. But spiritual practice is not about achieving a new, better normal, or a new, better you, or a new, better life. It is about moving beyond the complacency of this life right now, whatever complacency looks like. And so we come to something like this, when we could do literally anything else. Because that same intuition speaks to us. And it says, there's something about this. There's something about this that challenges me. It puts me in an uncomfortable place that I recognize as having value. I'll give it another shot. And then we sit down and we hear the bell and we watch ourselves go to all the places we want to go. And we say, no, I'm going to come back to this, to whatever this is. Even though it doesn't feel like or look like or smell like that other better thing that I want. even though the inside of my mind might. I feel very comfortable assuming that everyone who has sat in this way for any period of time at some point has tried on the fantasy of what if I were better? What if I were a little bit more Buddha-ish? And it feels good, right? You might sit up a little straighter. You might actually find something in that question. But imagining this new normal is not spiritual practice. It's the fantasy of not being here. It's the fantasy of life not being this. At the end of the day, in my understanding of the story, Siddhartha allowed for things to be as they are. He let go of trying to transform himself into something else. He let go of the idea of trying to leave behind the reality that he knew and said, okay, I'm really going to be here. This is what this is. I've heard teachers say over the years, remember, you don't have to do what the Buddha did. He did it for you, right? So you don't have to go into the forest and you don't have to meditate on your head for 6 years or live on a grain of rice. It's okay. Which is good advice. But the fact is that we all arrive here the same way. We all do what the Buddha did. We might not do it in a way that looks like what he did, but we all go through the process of trying to become someone else, trying to leave something behind, trying to see things through different eyes. And it might take 6 years and it might take a lifetime. But that path brings us back to here, to this simple task of choosing the hard thing. Choosing to be a little bit uncomfortable. Choosing that itch. When no one is really asking you to. And that's where I'll stop.